blessed to have Mikayla Koble here to do our parish mission this year. So I'm going to let her go ahead, and again, thank you each of you for taking time today to be here. Mikayla?
So thank you all for coming. Tonight, every night or morning, I guess, when I'm speaking this week, there'll be a different theme, and tonight will be themed on following God's will. And starting out in life, I honestly wasn't too concerned about what God's will was. And I, to some extent, thought that he was selfish and controlling because we were just supposed to follow him and do whatever he said, and that's how we were going to go to heaven. Because I didn't understand what it meant to follow him. And instead, I followed my own will, which was formed by the world, the will of the world, which pretty much boiled down to success. And because of this, I just joined a lot of organizations, a lot of sports, and did a lot of things. I was overscheduled, and in all of the things I was doing, I was a perfectionist because I thought that I had to do all of the things and I had to be the best in order to be of any worth, to be worthy of any attention or acceptance. And so I did that, and even in doing all those things and getting awards and leadership positions in those things, I still never felt enough. And I just kept doing more because it was a way to distract myself from just how not satisfying it was to reach for these achievements that really weren't attainable. And so that was my lifestyle, was just doing and doing and doing. And then one day, I was 16 years old and I woke up in a hospital room. Some of my friends were standing there and I had no idea why I was there, why they were there, how I got there. And I still don't remember being told, but eventually found out that I had been T-boned on my driver's side by a vehicle that was going between 60 and 70 miles per hour. This picture is of my car. If you can see it, I was hit on my driver's side, and that is, as you can see, the driver's side is gone. My seat was kind of twisted and plowed over onto the passenger seat. And by some miracle, I survived, only by a miracle, because it doesn't really make any sense. It's hard for me to even understand that it happened because I look at the pictures of my car and I saw the car itself, and I don't understand how I got out of it. And only with one scratch externally, it didn't look like anything had happened to me. But I was in a coma for 5 days. I had a bleed on my brain, collapsed lungs, and multiple breaks in my pelvis, in my spine and sacrum, and some severe bruising, some weird deformities, and I think that's all the things. It's not very medical, so I don't even know what to think. But it hurt. So I was in this crash, and I woke up. I couldn't even roll over onto my side for weeks, as was my main goal for a long time. I would try even just pulling with my arms, and I couldn't do it. And I was in despair, because if I couldn't do such simple things, how was I going to play volleyball and play soccer and do all of these things that I thought my worth was in? And so I thought that because I had lost my ability to achieve and to be successful, that I was worthless, that my identity had just been gone, that even though I had physically survived the crash, that I really hadn't, that I was gone. And it was miserable. I was angry, I was in pain, I felt isolated, and I wished that I wasn't here. And that's how it was for a couple of years. my last years of high school. And then I went on a pilgrimage to Rome, and one of the leaders was talking to me about offering pain up. And I never heard of that before, that my suffering could have value, that it wouldn't be wasted. And so I started to think in those terms, and then it got skewed in the other direction, and I thought that to be in pain was my purpose, that the crash was put in my life to justify my existence, and I became attached to suffering. But thankfully God didn't leave me there either. He, at every step in all of our lives, he comes where we're at and brings us to the next place without pushing us, but gently leading us. And while I was in college, I was reached out to by a student who was leading a Bible study, and she invited me into it, and I ignored her for a long time, but eventually started going to Bible study. And through this study and through this roommate that I had on campus, I started to see a different way of life, of putting Christ first. And in these people, I saw peace and joy, and I didn't think that I could have that because my life seemed so messed up. But I started to pray. I started to learn more about God and his will for us. And through this relationship that had been built through prayer, I realized that though I couldn't do what I had done before, I was capable to do whatever God called me to. And since then, I've discovered this verse in Proverbs 3:6. It says, "In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths." And so simply it was to go to him and discern what things he was calling me to do. If I wasn't capable of doing it, then I didn't need to do it. And so I remember at some point in college just making a list of the things that I could do to serve God and to love my neighbor, to volunteer at the food pantry, to lead a Bible study myself, and to just have relationships with people and share my life with them and invite them to also follow Christ and to grow in prayer. And so I was doing these things, and then the Lord started to bring bigger things up. And when I was a kid growing up and hearing about mission trips that you could do, like God's Child Project, I thought they sounded really cool, and I'd always wanted to do one, when I grew up. But then once I was in the crash, I didn't think that I would be able to, because my only concept of a mission trip was to, carry boulders up mountains and build houses. And I broke a lot of bones, and that didn't seem very possible, because I was in chronic pain after the crash. And then I went on a conference my sophomore year in college, and they had mission trips that were in the States and not so physically labor intensive. And so I signed up for a spring break trip in New York and an 8-week service program in Michigan called the Catholic Urban Project. And so I did those projects and saw greater ways that I could still do things, even though things that I wanted to do that I didn't think I was capable of, because God had different ways to go about them. And then, so he was bringing these new opportunities that were very exciting. And then he surprised me by also giving me opportunities to do things that I really shouldn't have been capable of physically. Every year we had a bike race between the Newman centers at UND and NDSU. And every year is a big deal, and every year I would just plan to be somewhere else so no one would ask me and I had to say, no, I can't, because I didn't like that. And so I would always schedule to be in other places, even Nebraska one year. And it was a good weekend still. But my junior year, I was feeling this pull in prayer to do the bike race, and I was like, that's a bad idea, God. I haven't been on a bike in 5 years. I broke the bones that I sit on. Like, I don't think, it was a 40-mile bike race. And I just kept bringing it to prayer, and I just felt very convicted that it was something I was supposed to do. And because he seemed sure of it, I said, okay. And then I didn't try riding a bike any time before the day, and which is probably good. But yeah, I showed up on the day of the bike race, and I sat on the bike, and that very instant that I sat down, just this shooting pain shot up, and I was like, there's no way that I'm going to be able to do this. Like, I don't want to sit back on the bike. Like, this is so painful. But I talked to one of my friends who was one of the few people who knew my circumstances, because I shut people out of that part of my life. And he was able to calm me down, and I was able to get back on the bike. And there were different stations throughout the 40 miles, but to like have water and a break, but I didn't stop at any of them because I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to get back on the bike. But I did it, and it was really cool. It really showed me that, you know, as Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And so I really wasn't limited by anything, even if it seemed like I was. That God could use my weaknesses to glorify him. And that made the weaknesses not so terrible. And I liked that freedom to be able to do anything that he was calling me to. But one thing that he led me to realize that I wasn't capable of was to serve as a wife and a mother, because I was hardly capable of supporting myself. I had a chronic pain, but it was escalated by very simple things like sitting and walking and lying down. And so even further activity was very stressful on my back. And I knew that God would make me able to do whatever he was calling me to do, and so I thought maybe I just wasn't called to that. And I thought that, or that he would help me to endure the pain when it came. But one day in prayer, it just all came together that I really wasn't capable. That I needed to ask for healing. And because I was very opposed to healing after this attachment to suffering that I had formed, that pain was my purpose, that I was only worth anything to God or other people if I was suffering in this way. And so it took several months of bringing this to prayer just to be open to healing. And then once I did, he made me realize that I wasn't able, that's not a word, I wasn't able to fulfill his will. If he was truly calling me to serve as a wife and a mother, then I wanted it gone because I wanted to fulfill his will. And if something was stopping me, I wanted it gone, and I knew that only he could take it away. That I, needed to be obedient to whatever he was calling me. And so I started to pray for healing. I started to look for doctors that could maybe help me out this time. And during this time, because I was looking for doctors, but I was also serving as a campus missionary at that time. And the school year was almost ending, and I didn't know where I was going to be placed for the following school year. And so I couldn't really start going somewhere until I knew where I was going to be living. And there was nothing in the area at the time. And so I was just kind of waiting it out, praying, and just praying. And this opportunity to go to Rome had come up. And when I first heard about it, I thought it was really cool, but I wasn't going to go because I thought that people would judge me for going because I'd already been to Rome and that I didn't need to go again. And it was a vocational discernment pilgrimage, and I just went on a vocational discernment retreat, and I felt pretty sure that I was called to be a wife and mother, which is why I was asking for healing, and so I thought it was silly. And so I wasn't going to go. And I was making all these excuses, finances and time and all of these things, and God just removed all of the obstacles, and there was suddenly money, and it was perfectly fit into my schedule, and just a lot of things that made me very convicted that it was His will. And for some reason, there was a common thread of Kansas City stalking me, and the leaders were from Kansas City, so that also played into it. But I decided to go on this pilgrimage to Rome, and it was 2 months into praying for healing, and all through the trip, it was very, very much on my heart, just feeling this conviction to be a wife and mother, and that I needed to be healed. And I was in a lot of pain that week. Traveling was really difficult, and I had a very dramatic Friday because it was, the day of the Lord's Passion, so we were doing all of the things related to that, like climbing the holy stairs on our knees and going to all of His places of suffering, and we were walking a lot, and I made a puddle of tears on one of the kneelers because I was very suffering. And I also missed a bus on the day of the strike, and it was the last bus, but it was okay because someone came to find me and we took a cab. But it was a rough day. And then the following day, we were having Mass in the room that St. Ignatius of Loyola died in, which I was really excited about because he was a saint that had become very close to me. He wasn't hit by a car, but he was hit by a cannonball and had his recovery through that. And so I related to him a lot, and he taught me a lot about how to pray and discern. And so I was really excited about that day. And after I received Jesus in the Eucharist, I went back to my spot. I was kneeling there, and I was just so grateful for this opportunity that I had to be back in Rome, to be back in the room that he had died in, and just for how much joy and peace that I was experiencing, even though I had this chronic pain and all of these emotional wounds and all this mess, that I just had this great experience and these great friends that I was making on this trip. And all of a sudden I realized that my back didn't hurt, and that took me by surprise. I had had chronic pain for 6 years at this point, and suddenly it was just gone. And especially in a time where it had been so painful from that day before and the week of traveling. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if it was gone forever or just for the trip or just for the moment, but I knew that was miraculous, that God was able to heal me, and that He wanted to do it in a way that fascinated me. In my best friend's room that he died in, that was cool. And so that was awesome. And then we left there to get on the train to go to Assisi, where St. Francis had lived, who was another one of my favorite saints. And we got there, and I was really grateful for this new healing thing, because if you've ever been to Assisi, it's just a bunch of hills and cobblestone roads, and I had luggage, and so that was awesome. But yeah, we got to our place, and then our leader announced that there was another change in the schedule, because we actually weren't planning to have Mass in the room St. Ignatius died in. That was a change. And the new change was that we would be hiking a mountain to the Hermitage of St. Francis the next day. And I was really excited because I wasn't allowed to hike it when I was there 4 years before. And now my back didn't hurt, and we had this opportunity again. But I was also terrified because I didn't know if it was going to work. I didn't know if the healing was gonna, last. But it did, which was great. And so I hiked up and down the mountain, and I was running down the mountain because I was so excited and just felt so free. And through this healing, and it's been over 4 years now since I was healed, and my back still feels great. And I am not a wife or mother at this point, but God has showed me that He has made me able to do so many other things, that I have been free to follow Him in ways that I didn't realize that I was being held back by my pain. And one of those things was the Camino. So in Spain, thousands of pilgrims every year hike the way of St. James the Apostle, and no one knows the real way, so there's a lot of different ways that you can walk. But in short, I, with a group, hiked 225 miles across Spain with all of my stuff on my back. And it was incredible. That was another thing that I learned about in college and never thought that I would be able to do. And then it all just lined up, and I was able to hike the Camino without this pain in my back. And I kind of felt bad at first because, everyone has some sort of pain on the Camino. And so at the beginning of the trip, a lot of people, their knees and the blisters, and people were struggling, and I felt really great. And at first that, bothered me because I felt guilty that I wasn't in pain. But God showed me that made me free to be there for those who were suffering. Because there will always be those suffering in our lives, and when we're too distracted by our own pain, then we can't show them love. And so I was able to slow down and walk with those who were struggling, to be with them, and to pray with them, and to talk about suffering with them based on my experiences. One girl, actually, her knees were really hurting, and so I prayed with her, and the next day her knees didn't hurt at all. And so that was really cool too. And so that was Spain. That was just 2 years after the healing. Or was it 1? No, 2. It was after it. And then another incredible experience I had was so I was a missionary with Focus, the Fellowship of Catholic University Students, and during the summer and spring breaks, we do mission trips with the students. And I was able to go on mission to Uganda, not this past summer, but the summer before. And that was amazing, just in general. But some of the things to highlight, I was able to share my testimony of forgiveness at a prison in Uganda, and I was able to share my testimony of survival at a refugee camp. And one of the things that we got to do that was maybe my favorite part is that we got to help build a health center on a hill in Africa. And so it was that desire that I'd always had, that I didn't even know we were going to be doing it on the trip. And I felt very blessed for that opportunity. And also just like the simple things of what I was most known for there was probably dancing and playing soccer with the kids and just being with the people and encountering them in their traditional ways, which was so fun, but definitely active. And I know that my life isn't supposed to be an exception to have all these great opportunities and this peace and this joy, that we are all meant to take part in it, to follow God's will. And it's going to look different for all of us, but we all play a part, and He has something special for each of us. And we follow him by listening to him. We can't listen if we don't ask either. And so pray. Even just start with 5 minutes a day. Just go to him in prayer. Go to Mass. Go daily if possible. Read and pray with Scripture. That's probably one of the most transforming things in my life, is just getting familiar with Scripture. And it can be as simple as reading the daily readings and reflecting on those and just allowing God to speak through them to you, because it is the Word of God. It's him speaking every time. And then another thing, to pray the Rosary. Yesterday was the feast of Our Lady of the Rosary, and October is the month of the Rosary. And when we go to Mary, she will always lead us to her Son. And so, pray the Rosary. And just allow the Lord to lead you, but don't be afraid to follow him. Because he can give you all of the direction, but if you don't give it a chance, nothing will change. And it starts with the small things. You know, talking to the person at your workplace, or writing a letter to someone you haven't seen in a long time. Allow him to lead you, however simple it might be. And in reflecting upon what success truly is, you know, that it's not in achievements and praise and glory and all those things, but that it's simply when everything works out, except for your own plans. Because in another verse is Proverbs 16:9. It says, "The human mind plans the way, but the Lord directs the steps." So we are called to, you know, go to him and listen, but it has to be us who makes the decisions and who follows through with them. And he will direct us. If we go astray, he'll put us back on track. And we're just called to go to him and to follow him as he leads us. And to repeat Proverbs 3:6 from earlier, "In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths." So go to him, pray, in whatever way that is. Offer him your desires, and allow him to mold them, to take away any desire that is not of him, and to give you whatever he does desire, so that your desire may be one with his, so that it may be fulfilled and it is what you want. Because only he can offer us the freedom and the joy and the peace that we desperately long for, because it was him who created us, and he created us to be in relationship with him. And so when we're not following him, when we are falling into sin, we are leaving what we were created to be. And that is what brings anxiety and fears and doubts. So I encourage you to keep going to him. And as a reminder that nothing can stop you but yourself. No other person can stop you. No tragedy in your life can stop you. Only yourself. Because God can overcome all things, no matter who had a part in it, whether it was yourself or some other person or nature. That God is bigger than everything. And he desires for you to be happy. And nothing that you could ask him is too big for him. And as a closing quote from St. Catherine of Siena, "Be who you are meant to be, and you will set the world on fire." Because it's as simple as that, to be who you are meant to be, and allow the Lord to form you into who you were made to be. So, thank you all for coming. I want to open up this time for any questions or comments.
you had the opportunity, Mikayla, to visit with anyone who experienced a healing similar to yours? Because your story that's a miracle, there's no question.
I did meet someone who had a pretty incredible healing. I don't know if I am familiar enough with it to tell it myself, but while I was a missionary in South Dakota, before the healing, there was an email that was sent out to all of the staff to pray for this young man who was serving as a missionary in Brazil, and he had some spine injury and had to be brought back to the States. And they gave us his address, and so I sent him a letter. And then, so I haven't actually met him, but we became friends over the, I guess, Facebook. And so we've kept up a little bit on, just how we were doing. And so that semester that I was put in touch with him was also the semester that I had started praying for healing. And he was the only one with a spine injury that I knew, so I asked him about his neurosurgeon, and I was looking, and that was one of the Kansas City things. The neurosurgeon was in Kansas City. And so I was asking him about things, and then that summer I was healed, and so he was the first person that I told, sorry, Mom and Dad. It just seemed more relevant to someone who was going through the same thing. But yeah, and he had kind of recovered from his thing, just had some pains and was continuing. But then, I don't remember how much later, he was back in Brazil and had another problem, and it left him paralyzed. And he had to be flown back to, I think, Florida or somewhere random. And they, didn't think that he would be able to walk again, and someone had prayed with him in the hospital, and after a couple of days he was able to start walking again. And so that's probably the closest similar story that I know of personally. But yes?
Did you find another doctor then? Was there another doctor that you did?
She asked if I did find another doctor, and I didn't, because God beat me to it. I was looking into things, but I was waiting until I moved, and 2 months into praying, I was healed. So, yeah. Any other questions? Oh, I skipped a whole part, so that's... following God's will. So, while I was in college, I was involved with this group Focus. I was leading a Bible study and meeting with a couple girls to talk about prayer and practicals of leading Bible studies. And I remember someone asking me if I would ever, be a Focus missionary, if I was going to apply, and I said, heck no, I will never do that. That is not my thing. Because I thought that I was too introverted and didn't know anything about Jesus and all those things. And I was just really excited about being a missionary in the world, and I didn't want it to be my job title. And then, because I was continuing to pray and give God my desires, he gently led them, and suddenly I was actually planning to go on a mission trip to Calcutta, another place I'd always wanted to go to. And in discerning this, I was like, well, if I graduate early and I apply for Focus, then I'll have to go to training and I won't be able to go to India. And I was very confused because I had never decided or even thought of applying for Focus. And so I, pushed that aside as quick as possible. But it just kept coming up on my heart. And the next time someone asked me if I was going to apply, I said yes. Because I just knew that I was supposed to. I just felt very convicted. But then, even though I was really sure, I really wanted to go to India. And so I thought, well, I can apply the following year. Like, if I know I'm supposed to do it, I don't have to do it right now. And so I put Focus out of the way because I didn't want to do that. And I was talking to people about India, was really excited about it, and then I just wasn't at peace with it. It just wasn't right. And so I knew that I wasn't supposed to go. And then, so that was out by the January. And I still wasn't planning on doing Focus right away. I was like, well, I already made a decision that I don't have to, so I can, accept this job at the preschool that I was offered in my internship, or go back to my regular summer job in Minot, or Catholic Urban Project is offering for us to go back without having to raise any money for it. And I loved that program. And so I had all of these opportunities, and Focus was last on the list, but I just knew that that was what I was supposed to do, just in acknowledging my desires, because I remember one day in class I was thinking about how I had been transformed and had so much joy and so much peace, and that there were so many people around me who didn't, and I knew that Jesus was the only way that they would find it. And I wanted to reach out to more people, but I didn't feel available to, because I had to go to class and I had to do my homework and I was doing too many things as per usual. And I remember thinking, I wish I could just be on campus and not have to worry about school. And then I put it together that that's exactly what Focus does. And so then I was mad at God, but he showed me my true desires. And so I am very grateful that I followed him, because Focus was the most, that was incredible. It was hard and definitely outside of my comfort zone, but it has built me into who I am, and I'm so grateful for all of the resources that it has given me and for the incredible miracles I've seen in the lives of the students that I've been able to walk with, in teaching them prayer and how to just give their lives to the people around them. And so I was a Focus missionary for 3.5 years on college campuses. And while I was doing that in my prayer, I had felt this urge to write songs. And I didn't even listen to music, so I thought that was really crazy. I didn't play instruments, I didn't do anything musical. And so I thought that was certainly could not have been from God, because that just did not make sense. But it kept coming up, and in a desire to be obedient and to follow his will, I gave it a try. And I started writing words down. I was like, how do you make noises with these? I don't even know. But things were just coming when I let them. And I wrote a song and I hid it away because I didn't think that anyone should ever listen to it or look at it. And the following year, I did a lot of ministry in the music building, which I should have made that connection, but I didn't. But I met a student who had just moved there and was getting her master's in vocal performance. And I knew that I couldn't sing this song that I wrote, and so I asked her to. And then we had a lot of fun making that first song, and so we were like, we should make a whole CD. And so we did, and we made lots of songs. And we started, and then we were traveling around, and I would share my story, and she would perform the songs that we had written. And that never would have happened if I hadn't just let God use me to write a song, because that's nothing I ever would have picked. And it also, I never probably would have traveled around to share my story, because speaking is more scary than writing songs. But I'm here. And yeah, everything in my life, it just, when I take a step back and look at it, it's just a bunch of random projects that the Lord is calling me to do, and it doesn't make sense to me, but it's really exciting and it seems to be working out. So I'm not with Focus anymore. I just exist, basically. I live in La Crosse, Wisconsin. I just moved there 2 months ago. I didn't know anyone there. I'd only been there once 3 years ago to go camping. But I felt like God was calling me to La Crosse because it was pretty, it was closer to home, because I was living 20 hours away on the east side of Michigan for Focus. And so, yeah, now I live in Wisconsin, and I paint, which is another thing I never thought I would do. And I write, another thing I never thought I would do. And then I travel to speak, like here. And all these things, you know, they're not things that I feel natural at and comfortable with. And so it can be very terrifying at times, because I don't think that I'm good enough. Then I just have to remember that, you know, success is not in achievements, that it's in doing God's will. And so God continues to move, and so I'm continuing to follow him wherever that takes me, and it's exciting, and people think I'm crazy, and it's okay. Because, yeah, it can be hard. We're not all called to we're all called to give up everything, but that looks different for all of us. For me, it is to give up a steady source of income, which can be terrifying, but he didn't call me straight to that. He called me to a lot of other steps that led up to this, to join a nonprofit where I fundraise my salary, then to start a nonprofit where it still didn't have money but was living, and now to even drop that step and just living as I am and just trusting that God will provide, and he does. And yeah, just giving up that stability to have the freedom for God to use me in however he wants. So I have the freedom to travel and do parish missions and pilgrimages with people, and to spend my time when I am at home to write and paint and do those things. And I am very grateful for the trust he has built in me, and that it's not just for myself, that I can share my stories with all of you, to encourage you to grow in trusting him, to giving him a chance. And thank you for having me here. Are there any questions now? Yes?
You go to public schools, speak to the students in the public schools?
I have not been to any public schools at this
They
point.
need you.
Yeah.
Public schools.
They invite me, and I would love to do something if that is what God wills.
You are though, Mikayla, speaking at something on Wednesday, aren't you, for kids?
Yes, I am speaking at the Rock at Bishop Ryan this Wednesday. So.
Know that our kids from our parish will be going there to listen to Mikayla. Hopefully there'll be many others there.
And you're not with CORE anymore?
Yeah, so the nonprofit that my friend and I started is called CORE, the Latin word for heart, because our mission was to share God's heart. And we still have another event in November, but after that, CORE is no longer, I don't know how to say it's ending, I don't know. But I will still be basically doing all the same things, traveling and speaking and maybe hiring musicians if it is a musical involvement thing. But yeah. If there are no more questions or comments, so one of the things that I randomly project are making rosaries, and so I have some up here if you would like. They are available for purchase, and yeah, and if you have any questions, you can talk to me directly. But thank you all for coming.